Anyway, we're here at Kilo Raceway Park with Paul Maddox, one of the old-time magazine and promoters. And he was there actually from the beginning.
With Hawaii Raceway Park, yes. Yeah, even before that, Kahuku days. Used to go out to the track there and was there on the opening day in '64 when the track opened.
How did you get involved in all of this? You were doing other things prior to this, right?
Drag racing?
Right.
Yeah, the Army. I got out of high school, I joined the Army to come to Hawaii and in '61, and I was in the Army until '64. That's how I was going to the drags and stuff out of Kahuku, and then Raceway Park opened, I went out to see that. And then I went back to the mainland to California in '65, '66 to work, and I worked for Drag News, which was really neat. That's how I learned how to do newspapers. And but that time, those era, you had Watts riots and all that stuff going on in LA, and I said, this is no place to raise a baby, and we just had a first child, so I wrote to Jimmy Pflueger and said, would you like to have somebody put out a newspaper for Hawaii Raceway Park? And he wrote back and said, I'll meet you at the Winter Nationals in '66 it was, I guess. And by the time I met up with him there, he'd talked to, I guess, the right people that said the right things. And he said, okay, you're hired, I'll come on over and we'll start. So in March of '67, we put out the first issue of Hawaii Raceway News. That was our beginning.
You had several different newspapers, right, out at Hawaii Raceway Park.
Well, it started as Hawaii Raceway News, which was initially just coverage of the racing there at Hawaii Raceway Park, which was stock cars on the oval track or the road course, and some sports car events on the road course, but mainly drag racing. But around that time, everything else was starting to happen. Power boats were racing in Kihei Lagoon, and the first dirt bikes were starting to show up, and off-road dirt bike racing was happening. And we called it scrambles back then, not motocross. But so I wanted to cover more of these things, and Jimmy was pretty good about it. He said, yeah, go ahead. But he was not really sure that's what he wanted the paper to do. So in '68, I left his employ and just carried on and changed the name to Hawaii Racing News and carried on from there. And it was Hawaii Racing News for, I guess, until about maybe the '70s. And then I changed the name to Racer because I had another paper called Sunbums at that time. So I wanted one name papers. And it was Racer until I basically turned it over. I think went back to Hawaii Racing News when Bill Pettigrew, who was my motorcycle editor then, said he would take it over and keep doing the regular race coverage.
You know, like over all the years like you spent at the beginning, who were like probably the greatest racers you ever got to see?
The greatest racers? Oh boy, this one's going to get me in trouble, right? If I don't mention the right names, but some of the best, Ken Kepner certainly comes to mind as a really good racer, excellent craftsman, built his own cars and motors. Snyder was Elmer Snyder was one of the first ones to really run strong and consistently with the dragsters. The Peroff family, a great family that raced hard every race, all the time. Boy, a long list. Help me now. Richard Armstrong comes to mind. He was a guy that had no budget. He was a school teacher, I think, from Waipahu. And he raced a little Chevy dragster with carburetor. And I think he's the only guy that ever made money drag racing because he had such a budget car and he was a very consistent bracket racer. So he did really good. Certainly Mel Pastana, outstanding racer in anything you put him in. He raced power boats, stock cars, dragsters, anything. He would race them and race them hard. He was a great racer, great track manager too. Lots of guys.
Shall we? Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
You gave somebody a nickname. And it really stuck. Although, if you really knew the guy,
I know who you're talking about. That would be Gentleman Jack Canberra.
Right.
Certainly one of the more colorful personalities at Hawaii Raceway Park over the years. He raced. I remember his first car. I think it was a '55 Chevy, really strong. He got himself some sponsorship from Servco and had one of the first floppers, one of the first funny cars. Very dramatic guy, shall we say. Not always the smoothest, gentlest character. So I nicknamed him Gentleman Jack, just kind of in jest, and it stuck. And we called him that ever since. And I think it actually mellowed him out a little bit.
You took a long hiatus away from motorsports, and you went to crazy shows.
Yeah, '77 to about '89 or so.
So now that you're the guy that were behind all the T-shirts I used to, actually my parents used to buy from me.
Oh, gee, lighten up. Yeah, probably so. We did a lot of shirts. It was a great company. I knew Rick Ralston from motorcycle riding days. And when I lived over here in Kona in '76 for about a year, kind of cooling my heels, and I went back in '77. He saw an ad in the newspaper for an art director and advertising director for Crazy Shirts. I said, well, I know Rick, I'll give him a call. So I called him up. I said, what's an art director and an advertising director do? And he said, why, are you interested? I said, well, maybe. So and I went in and interviewed with him, and he said, yeah, go ahead, give it a shot. And I was broke and upside down, so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So he had, I think, 10 stores at the time, Alawana, Pearl Ridge, Windward Mall. He was just really getting going with it. And we had a really hot 10 years. When I left, we had 50-something stores all over the mainland, and the thing was just booking money. So, but it made me well, and able to move back to the Big Island and get a place over here and get away from the Oahu madness.
Okay. You came back into motorsports in what, '97?
Yeah, about '97 it was, yeah.
What did you see as the different racers? Like, it was a different breed of racers you got to see.
Oh yeah, I was just amazed at all the electronics and all the throttle stops and rev limiters and all this stuff. I mean, in my day, go back to it was just balls to the wall, run them. There was no electronics to help control anything. You blew them up or you ran them, and so that was all different. And it had all gone to bracket racing, which I always liked heads-up racing, our quote top eliminator program. Which was only a half dozen cars usually at any race, but it was always the fun part of the show for me.
Were you part of the guys who started that Top Gun program?
At Hawaii Raceway Park when I came back? Yeah, I did.
Hey, thanks to you, we made a lot of
yeah, you guys made some bucks off that. I think Goodyear was our sponsor for that one, and we had a lot of good sponsors in those years with Paul G. We had certain Napa was a great sponsor. They came in and sponsored all of our major events and gave us TV coverage and things that helped bring some people in, and Snap-on Tools helped with the Pro Gas program, and Goodyear with the Top Gun show. And I would like to see that continue a little longer, but well, I would have liked to see Hawaii Raceway Park continue a little longer.
You probably worked with Jimmy Pflueger the most, and he's really the one who built Hawaii Raceway Park.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can tell us about him? Because, really, we can't get a hold of him.
Well, in hopes that he never sees this. I remember when I was at the track on opening day, at that July race in '64, I was just a spectator, a kid hanging on the fence watching the races with everybody else. And a guy came out on the starting line and with a big straw hat on and a big, tall, muscular guy, and he was kind of talking to people, and you could tell he was the boss. And I think the announcer said, "This is Jimmy Pflueger, the fellow that built the track." And my impression of him then was, wow, that's quite a guy, very impressive. So that impression was probably true, first impressions. A very charismatic guy, very much an athlete, very much used to having things his own way, doing things his own way, very strong-willed. And I'm sure he built that truck out of gumption as much as anything else. I'm sure it took some political pressure and things like that to get that facility built out there at Campbell, which was basically an industrial park, not a recreational park. But he got it done through his own style and got it built and got it open, and I give him credit for that. And I give him credit for hiring me with really not knowing who the heck I was, and giving me enough rope to put out the paper and promote racing and work with his various track managers for the first few years, and a very strong guy.
You think we'll ever see another Jimmy Pflueger in Hawaii?
Hard to say. He's just that kind of a character. Maybe it was once in a lifetime, but certainly for racing, he was what we needed when we needed it to get the drag strip built. And a lot of it was Pete Wimberly, who was the architect that designed the track, was in cahoots with Jimmy. Pete was a sports car guy. That's why the drag strip had a 2-mile road course around it. Even though there wasn't that much sports car racing, Pete said, "I'll help, but I want a sports car track." So Pete, he knew how to bring the right people together, certainly, to get it done. And he was very close to NHRA and pretty much took anything they ever had to say as gospel. And Bernie Partridge, who was our regional director back in those days, was over here a lot and helped him coordinate bringing in mainland cars, which Jimmy was always fond of doing, at least once a month it seemed like we were bringing in mainland cars, a couple of cars from Match Race, or 3 or 4 cars. And, always had plenty of mainland cars coming in to put on a good show, which helped bring in a lot of people.
Of all the like the mainland races who came from the mainland to Hawaii, any of them really stood out to you?
Wow.
That did like really well here in Hawaii.
That did really well here? Well, I'll have to say the Chi-Town Hustler did a hell of a job. When they came over early on, when they were first starting match racing, they put on a hell of a show. Those almost quarter-mile burnouts and things that they did were really awesome. But all the dragsters that came over and funny cars that came over were good guys. They had a great time. Jimmy always made sure that they had fun. And Mel Pastana, when he was track manager, made sure they went to luau's and got to do all the fun stuff in Hawaii. And they always stayed in nice hotels. And we always took care of getting their cars to the track and all the work stuff, so they got to enjoy their stay in Hawaii. And those first few years, we must have had 20 or 30 mainland cars and teams come in, and their families would spend a week in Hawaii and race on weekends, put on a good match race show, and go home happy.
Is there any like one event of all the years you've been involved in this thing? Any one particular event that stood out more than any other event?
Yeah, there is one, and I think it's when Ernie Jackson had taken over the track right after Jimmy started leasing it out, after Jimmy got out of trying to run it himself. Ernie Jackson had rented the facility, and we had I think it was a Firecracker 400 or something weekend. The stock car track had just been built, motocross was just starting to happen. So we had, on one weekend, we had drags for 2 days, we had a motocross down at the far end of the track where the sports car course was, and had a big stock car show, all happening at once. So it was for one $5 ticket or something, you could come and do all these things all day long and go to all these events. And we started off the show with, in fact, I think it was Gentleman Jack Canberra and Ernie's car. A-gas cars were a big thing back in those days, little A-gas cars. And we had 6 or 8 of them at any given time, and they were all heads-up racing. And we started the show at 8 o'clock, right on the money, with Gentlemen Start Your Engines, and had all these cars staged and ready to go. And these 2 little A-gassers came out doing their burnouts and carrying the front wheels past the Christmas tree. Crowd went crazy. Had a fireworks show, big fireworks show for those days, at 9 o'clock, and it was just constant racing all night long. It was one of those, wow, at the end of the night deals, you went, that was a show. We put on a show, and it really was.
Someone will never be able to put on a show like that anywhere in Hawaii?
If we ever get the Kona Motorsport Park built, you bet your life. I can't wait.
Okay, hope to see you there.
All right.
Thanks for your time.